Welcome to The Game. This is the show where we go play by play analyzing the game of politics. Today, we turn to four important stories impacting the United States. We start off with the Saudi prince coming to the United States, to the White House specifically, to meet with Donald Trump, to talk about everything about peace deals, investments in AI, and the future relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Then we turn to Mexico City, and really just Mexico in general, where Gen Z has gone to the streets. They're protesting against corruption. They're asking for transparency. They're asking for change from President Sheinbaum. We'll discuss what her reactions are. Then we're also going to be looking at the situation with Mamdani. Mamdani will be coming to the White House on Friday to talk with President Donald Trump. This is the first time, if I'm not mistaken, that they meet, and that we'll be discussing the issues that are impacting not just New York, but the United States in general. Then we turn to Texas, where Governor Abbott has been taking a strong stance against a few Muslim groups who are trying to put together a compound, who are trying to put forward their values. We're going to discuss how this might go against Texas values and American values. And joining me here to discuss these topics, we have Daniel Garza, president of the Libre Initiative. Daniel, how are you today?
Senor, good to be on with you, man.
It's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Daniel, we want to start off with the Prince of Saudi Arabia coming here to the United States. It's no secret. The Middle East is a place of focus, not just today, but just in the years previous. I mean, when we talk about energy, oil specifically, when we talk about investments, but also when we talk about war, the Middle East in general has been a place of attention. Saudi Arabia is in an interesting position where they've almost kind of gone back and forth, where there's been times where they've been seen as strong allies and they've been sort of on the right side of what we believe is history, but also where some of their allies have been our enemies. I want to ask you, in general, the fact that President Trump has not just in this term, but in his first term, have been a president who's taken a different approach to foreign policy. In some places, he's been very direct. He dropped the bomb on the nuclear facilities in Iran. And then in other places, he's been very good at putting peace deals together. When you think of our relationship with Saudi Arabia, what do you think are those priorities that the president really should be focusing on in our future conversations with Saudi Arabia?
Well, Wadi, let me first say that, I mean, it looks like they have a great relationship, between the Saudi Arabian prince, Mohammed bin Salman, and that, he sees it as a strategic partnership, especially in that volatile region, right, that has given, well, really the world some, headaches, to say the least. And what's interesting about that relationship is they almost treat each other like bros, It's like the way they're kind of, touching and slapping each other around and joking, and they have a confianza, right? That you can see. And you didn't see that with Obama and Biden, who famously struggled with their relationship with Riyadh, honestly. And this is no small thing, because of their importance and the weight that Saudi Arabia has in that region, and now even at a global scale with regards to oil supply and stabilizing those prices. This is an important relationship that I think Donald Trump understands very well, and Trump has articulated, I think, the consistent reasons why Saudi Arabia matters to the U.S. I mean, obviously, it's a major source of financial investment in the U.S. economy. Yeah. Also, let me say entre parentheses that it's been noted that they have been trying to make inroads culturally, with the WWE, Live Golf, Mr. Beastland. It's almost like they want to become almost the U.S. of that region, in a very real sense. So it's been really interesting. Or is there like another aim with that? That still remains to be seen. It's kind of sketchy, but they are, of course, the largest purchasers of American weapon systems and technology, and of course that has a lot of value to the U.S.
Yeah, and there's several threads that we can pull on there. And I do want to highlight one of your points is I think one of the reasons why Donald Trump comes in with such an immense level of confidence, I think, to these meetings is one, even previous to being president of the United States, Donald Trump is someone who understood the region. He's had, not necessarily in Saudi Arabia, but just in the Middle East, he's had properties, he's visited. He's been someone who's helped sort of broker other deals, again, outside of politics in that place. So Donald Trump is a well-known name in that area. And then obviously, as sitting president of the United States, he can come in with that weight and confidence. Danny, I want to break down some of these topics. You talked about the soft power, right? When we talk about soft power, we talk about how countries can influence other countries, not just through weapons, not just through armies, but that soft power being entertainment, culture, some of the norms, technology, and you hit it spot on. Saudi Arabia has been focusing on that soft power. One of the figures that was at some of the meetings and just at the White House was Cristiano Ronaldo. Saudi Arabia has built their soccer industry, their league, with bringing big names from Cristiano that I just mentioned, but also Neymar. Another soft power is AI. Saudi Arabia in the last few years has talked and has recognized that the country or the world is moving kind of away from oil, not 100%, but there's a lot of talks about solar energy. There's a lot of talks about nuclear, and they don't want to be left behind or depend solely on oil. AI was one of the conversations that came up. They're investing heavily in the United States, and they want to be part of the conversation. Do you think this is one of those topics where the U.S. can also benefit from the monetary investment that they're going to bring specifically in AI? Because I'll say one more point. We're competing with China, right? China's also putting together their own data centers. China's also putting together their own artificial intelligence. How important is it that we're teaming up and that we're working with Saudi Arabia in this space?
Well, energy is everything, and Saudi Arabia has loads of it, right? And they are a key actor in stabilizing and lowering oil prices. Something I think the presidents of both parties, have sought before the elections. I mean, Biden and Trump, but Trump to a higher degree, right? To keep inflation down. If you can control energy prices, that of course then brings down inflation across everything in all sectors of the American economy. And you're right. Saudi Arabia is a critical player in the U.S. competition with China, right? Since it's famously Beijing relies heavily on Saudi crude, and so you got to keep your friends, super close on this one. But it's also, Wadi, I think, been interesting to see, Hezbollah, and ISIS and Hamas doubling down on extremism and terrorism, but you see Saudi Arabia going exactly the other way, mainstream, becoming more of a Western civilization. I don't know if it's part of their strategy to make Americans more comfortable with them, and begin to embrace their culture a bit more than the other extreme, that of course scares the living daylights out of everybody. But there's a normalization that is happening, and I think Riyadh, seeks, I think, a regional order to things, and it's a nation state that has built a prosperous society that seeks to have a very positive relationship with the United States. This is also important for Israel, by the way. And the only reason why, of course, when we're talking about stabilization, countries like Saudi Arabia, joining the Abraham Accords would be very important, again, because it brings stability to the region, something that Iran and the Houthis and Iraqi Shiites and the militias and jihadists are not, right? And so I think if CENTCOM can have a peace, then I think they don't have to intercept so many bombs, but all that matters, right? The relationship, the international order of things. I think Saudi Arabia wants access to the same level of U.S. protections as well that are made by Israel. The missile defense systems, the carrier striker groups. All this, in partnership with the U.S. is of major concern to and benefit to the Saudis. They know what they're doing, and so drawing closer to the U.S., I think, will also give them a better sense of protection as well in that area.
There's a lot of moving parts in that discussion, and Saudi Arabia is in the Middle East a key component of it. You mentioned Israel. a lot of people, when they point back to the October 7th attacks from Hamas on Israel, where they killed over 1,200 Jews, is one of the reasons, one of the inflection points that many people point to, is that they believe that they were trying to stop Saudi Arabia from signing those Abraham Accords. There were already discussions being had, and it did put Saudi Arabia in a little bit of a tricky situation when the conflict began to arise, where Israel essentially came back to defend itself. But I think this step now coming to the United States does send signals that Saudi Arabia is one of those countries that is willing to have those discussions. Like you've mentioned, also, Saudi Arabia is looking for those allies. One of the news reports coming out is that Trump said that NATO should be looking at Saudi Arabia as a key ally in this space. Again, in a world where many moving pieces are, not all Muslim countries in the Middle East are the same. Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example, have not been partners in this space. Do you think we will see, Donald Trump just did a trip not too long ago to the Middle East. Do you think we'll see more countries sort of following the lead of Saudi Arabia, maybe a Jordan or an Egypt? Do you think Donald Trump will be welcoming them here? Or is this very unique? Because Saudi Arabia, again, is a cross point with technology, with defense, and with energy. Is this somewhat of a unique situation in your opinion?
Look, I think like-minded states, sort of seek each other out, and they have, I think, in accordance with the kind of aims that they're trying to reach, right? If you lean instinctively towards peace, then you draw away from those countries that are bending towards extremism. If you lean towards peace, then you seek those countries, like Israel, the U.S., the European partners, and my sense is that that's where Saudi Arabia is leaning, right? And still, of course, they don't get me wrong, they still have, of course, their relationships with a lot of Middle Eastern countries that are a danger, to peaceful societies. One of the resistance to them joining the Abraham Accords is because, the Israel refuses to give statehood to Gaza, which, or Palestine, which is, what Saudis have been seeking. And so again, this isn't Pollyannish either. But even without the formal normalization that would occur between an Israel and Saudi Arabia, quietly they've been engaging for years, which is, you're right. It was one of the reasons that provoked the attack, was to interrupt that relationship that's been building between, Israel and Saudi Arabia and Western countries. I think the cooperation was rumored also in intelligence sharing between Israel and Saudi Arabia, that there was this limited sort of relationship on defense matters as well. The athletes, were licensed and to go to Saudi Arabia and compete in competitions there. It seems small, but these are big things, on national order of things, because it's a melting of that hard division that used to exist between Israel and the Middle Eastern countries, and so any kind of warming to that, those strengthening those bonds, is a signal to the extremists, right? That they're losing control over what they're seeking to impose, which is a totalitarian Islamic top-down government, and so Israel has always been a threat to that, and now, of course, Saudi Arabia warming to the West, is sending alarm bells across the extremists. So there's a lot of layers here. There's a lot of complications, but there's no question that I think what Trump is doing is the correct avenue. Famously, for a while, they had been saying that no two countries with McDonald's have ever warred against each other, right? Because when you have economic ties, it's really hard to try to interrupt that, because of the prosperity that is being felt, by the citizenry in those states. is one that they want to preserve, that they don't want to interrupt. And so, anyways, I think we should continue down that road.
Yeah, a topic with many layers that we'll continue to follow here on the game. But Daniel, I do want to turn our attention now to and shift the conversation over to Mexico, where we've seen several protests led mainly by the youth of Mexico, Gen Z generation coming together. They're saying they're protesting because of the corruption they've seen in the government, because the cartels have been able to essentially take over the streets without any pushback from governments. They've also cited a lack of opportunity, economic opportunity. They've also talked about a lack of transparency from the government, and they're demanding action on the crime that they're feeling in their neighborhoods, in their cities. But these protests don't come without controversy. President Sheinbaum, many have looked at her reaction to this as not an ally. Someone, if anything, has put these folks in danger. For those who have been following the topic, what's the backstory? Why is it that these folks are really coming to the street? And what is it that they're seeing, feeling? And what is it that they're asking for?
Well, it's the failed approach of the Morena party to the cartel violence. The citizens of Mexico living under intimidation and violence every day, the murders, the disappearance of people, the fact that, the Sheinbaum refuses to acknowledge it, or that it, acknowledge that it's getting worse even. She'll give you these charts, that show that, the trends and the statistics are actually improving the situation because she has a hands-off approach to the cartels, which is absolutely entirely manipulative and also naive. Look, I think the real pitiful reaction from Sheinbaum to all this is the indifference, right? To the civilian outrage over the crime that has Mexicans living in fear. And this is personal to me because my own parents and even myself to a certain extent, we live in my parents live in a region of Mexico that is controlled by the cartels, right? And they are intimidated, and there's this persistent atmosphere of violence, right? But she's dismissive of it, right? And in denial of this sort of oppressive reality. Everybody sees it, everybody experiences it. Hell, Hollywood's making movies about it, but she doesn't see it, right? And in fact, again, she asserts her position with stats that don't show the disappearances, which is about 20,000 a year of Mexicans just disappear. And the media has called her out, some in Mexico, but there's no question that there is also an element of the media that is protecting her, that is, enough for her and pushing out propaganda instead of, recognizing what everybody is experiencing in Mexico. And I think that's what led these Gen Z folks, and it wasn't just Gen Z, part of Sheinbaum's, reaction to this whole thing was, it wasn't just, the youth that were out there, that they're lying to us. It never was just about the youth. It's all Mexicans who were concerned about this. And that's who showed up at the protest. And they were met with violence by the police there.
It's astonishing that, look, we could understand when you're in power, you want to paint a pretty picture of what you're doing. But what's astonishing to me is you can maybe say, hey, this is what we're doing. We think this is getting better, but we recognize this is bad. And this is why we're doubling down. This is why we're hearing to your concerns. But it seems like from the beginning, Sheinbaum and her government, like you mentioned, were very quick to critique these groups, right? They started painting them as sort of being infiltrated by the far right, and that these were actually not young people who cared about it, and that everything's okay. I think to the point where she maybe even started sharing images of some of these individuals, because you have to remember these protests are not just a protest against her, it's a protest against the cartels. It's a protest against the people who are doing the crime. And they're asking her to do something about it. So, of course, who's not going to like these protests? The cartels, the criminals. And by her exposing these individuals, she's made it a lot difficult for that freedom of speech, or for people to be able to hit the streets. What do you think is the next step for these groups? Is it more protest? It seems to be an organized group in the sense that they're using social media. They're leaning on X. They're leaning on TikTok to organize people. It's not just in Mexico cities, but it's in cities across Mexico.
Well, thanks to Sheinbaum, it is going to expand. It is going to worsen for her. It's going to intensify, right, the protests, because you're right. She could have taken care of it by just acknowledging the concerns and the sentiments of these folks, who showed up to appeal to their elected leaders. That's what it is. It's the right to petition your government. But to her, because she's such a partisan, she sniffs danger to her party, right? It's all she cares about. Partisans like her think that ideological dissent is fascism. If you don't submit, to her agenda, then you're a fascist, right? Because you're outside of her order of things. Any resistance to Morena's moral worldview is unacceptable to somebody like Sheinbaum. She's a totalitarian in that sense. And so, the way she sees it is that only her party's dissent matters. Only Morena is allowed to hold protests and marches or demonstrations. Only Morena has some inherent virtue. It's delusional, but it's all about holding power for her, and that's why she strikes back, insulting people. And like you mentioned, she exposed a lot of these young coordinators. Put their names out there, branded them as enemies to the state, and basically put their lives in danger. And some of them have already announced that they're leaving Mexico because of the threats that they've been receiving as a reaction to what Sheinbaum did. She exposed many of the coordinators of the rally with awful intent. Yeah, and so this is part of the problem, that she's intensifying, and again, not recognizing what the real danger is there. And so thousands of young people, are going to continue. They have, boldly stated that they're not intimidated by Sheinbaum or her tactics to investigate them. She puts more money into investigating the dissenters of her agenda than the actual cartel. Again, just part of what infuriates these things. She's so thin-skinned, right? And she'll probably have to, if she could, come after folks in the U.S. who have been criticizing her. And that's a growing list of people, by the way. But yeah, I think what needs to happen is that just intensify the pressure on the Sheinbaum administration is to move forward. And this aggressive repression of rally goers, I think, needs to be called out, right? It's a sort of repeat, Wadi, of the bloody 68 takedowns by then President Diaz Ordaz, who did sort of hard repression of protesters back then, and now Sheinbaum has repeated history, and locked up kids in jail who were at that protest, who participated in the demonstration. Again, she's just harder on people who oppose her than the actual cartel who are killing her own people. And so, I think one of the symbols, para terminar, one of the symbols that I saw that's going to endure was that, the President Sheinbaum had ordered the flag of Mexico that flew proudly in the middle of the Zócalo. She ordered it to come down, for the protest. But rally goers, obviously took their own Mexican flag, and one in particular, there was a shot of him, in the gases that were being thrown by the riot police. In the thick of it, he was holding up the flag proudly, and I think, again, symbolic of the persistence of people who are, not satisfied, with the situation, and they will continue to protest, what is happening. And as a result, Sheinbaum's approval rating has collapsed. She's at 41%, down from the high 70s that she presumed even a month ago.
What do you think? One more question on this topic. What do you think is the next inflection point in politics in Mexico, election-wise? Because AMLO was president for several years, and some people thought that Mexico wasn't going to bring a shift of power, but Sheinbaum is a continuation, essentially, of AMLO. Some would say a worse continuation of AMLO. When is the next either state level or congressional equivalent elections, or the next presidential elections that might serve as a pivot or as an inflection point where these voters can sort of come out and have their voice heard in a different way?
Well, there's another 4 years for the presidential. So Sheinbaum, the best that could happen there is that she's impeached, but Morena will still remain in power, right? So you have to wait on that one. But I think the inflection point is going to come on, the upcoming governor's races, the Senate, diputados, the Congress, the congressional races that you're going to see, and how badly burned, the Morena party is going to be out of all this. If she continues to double down on her obstinance and, her failure to recognize her failed policy, I think there is going to be a damage done to her party. I myself am going to be hosting four governor candidates in Washington, D.C. in the first week of December. And they're of course, coming after the Morena party, hot and heavy. Again, this is growing displeasure at this failure. Look, we're not even asking you to do what Bukele did in El Salvador, but at least show some effort here. That you are that at least that that the cartel are the enemies of law-abiding people, as opposed to law-abiding people who protest the cartels being the enemy. For the love of God, yeah, I think there's gonna be a lot of damage to the party moving forward. That's what I anticipate. People are angry, they're upset, and you have a president of Mexico who has her head in the sand.
Yeah, I have a big curiosity of what do leaders in other countries outside of El Salvador feel about Bukele. My parents are from Honduras, and it's a neighboring country. It's a country that we were in similar situations, and Bukele has completely transformed the country when it comes to crime, when it comes to economics, when it comes to bringing in companies to invest. I just saw a video that they're bringing up these mercados. I mean, these beautiful, essentially facilities where people who sell everything from pupusas to vegetables to fruits have their own booth where they can sell. And I think there's so many other countries that should and try to replicate. And I know there's different dynamics, but again, that curiosity of what are the leaders of Honduras, of Mexico, of opposition parties, how are they studying Bukele? Is there a level of like, no, that's just a different one-off? Or are they saying like, hey, what's that playbook, Bukele? What did your party do? How can we implement some of these policies? But Danny, I do want to move on to our third topic. We're going to be crossing the border into the United States, specifically into Texas, your home state. Texas has been front and center for news this year, a lot of it when it comes to the votes to redistricting. But Governor Abbott this time has been looking at specifically some groups with it that are Muslim groups that have been taking efforts in Texas. One specifically has been looking at building a compound, some call it, where they want to have their own school, they want to have their own housing, they want to have their own facilities, their own mercado, grocery stores, and they want to make it, I don't think they've used the word exclusive, but they want to use it very focused on these Muslim groups, right? Again, they haven't used the words, but when you read into it, it looks like it's very specific to one group. Where do you think, what are the concerns that you're hearing that Governor Abbott and the citizens of Texas have towards these groups?
There is a concern because, obviously America has a sympathy to people who flee persecution and oppression, but you shouldn't seek to impose it here. And I think that's, they see elements of that, within many of the Islamic immigrants that are coming to America. And so even John Cornyn, who's our senator, put out a press release warning against this, Epic City development. It was a master planned community of thousands of Muslims, he says, seeks to assertively almost violate the constitutional rights of Jewish and Christian Texans by preventing them from living in this new community, right? And discriminating against them within this community because it's Muslim only. Can you actually do that in the US? Well, no. And so why would you even, seek to impose something like that or build something like that? There's just a concern that these grand cities violate equal protection under the law, right? This is submitting one's religious freedoms to another group that as that group freely discriminate against your beliefs, right? So one of the examples, that has sort of been bandied about is, what's happened in Dearborn, right? It's sort of an alarm bell, a canary in the coal mine. The mayor of Dearborn, who is a Muslim, moved to brand a local citizen a persona non grata, right, for expressing reasonable concerns over mosque noise levels. The sort of call to prayer that they do in the Islamic world, right? He quickly moved to banish an American citizen from the city, as if he could, right? For not being submissive to Muslim wants, to Islamic culture and rituals. It was basically demanding citizens begin to withdraw their own culture and Christian traditions and submit them to Islam. That's a problem, Wadi. And I think there's this false expectation that the immigrants have these super rights, right, to impose their will, their beliefs over those of American citizens, especially if you're Christian. And this has to be resisted, I think. So whether explicit or implicit, um, it's unconstitutional under the First and 14th Amendments. And religious freedom is a cornerstone of our nation's values, and it will be respected. And so that's part of the concern. Am I saying that all Muslims are like that? Of course not. But
course.
there's way too many within the Muslim culture that have this agenda in mind. These cities, these no-go cities, these no-go areas of even within a city, that are a problem and are not compatible with the U.S. Constitution and must be addressed.
And I think when it comes to Texas, some folks might see this as somewhat of an isolated event, but there have been other stories you've mentioned, even outside of Texas. There have been these cases where folks are looking at. It seems like their approach is a little bit different. It seems like their approach is sort of like it's our approach or no other approach, right? And I think, when you look at the Constitution, when you look at the principle of the United States, it's freedom of religion, with not one religion noted. Granted, we are a nation founded with Christian values, but even our founding fathers understood the importance of freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion, right? They didn't, although there are core values related to Christianity, they did understand
and the
still.
problem, Wadi, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the problem,
no, please.
Sharia law imposes on that. Sharia law proposals must be defeated, right? Because you're not going to live under one law for Muslims and another law for everybody else. That is un-American and a threat to equality under the law. Like I said, women will benefit from just and equal laws. No religion will be treated one way and another religion treated another under any law. And that's why I say that they are incompatible with the U.S. Constitution, and Sharia law has no place in America, none. It's a system of laws that are far inferior to the U.S. Constitution, and must be resisted in every possible way.
It's a topic that we're going to continue to follow here because I think these groups are trying to push back, but Governor Abbott has been very strong on his position, has received a lot of support from the citizens of Texas. So it's one that I think, although he's making sure to nip it in the bud, I think we'll continue to follow it because the critics, again, they're trying to find new ways and new avenues to continue with their goals. But switching to our next topic, it is soon to be Mayor of New York, Mamdani. He is mayor-elect. He is also a Muslim. Mamdani is going to be going to the White House. He's going to be meeting with President Donald Trump. I think many folks view this as a high-stakes meeting in the sense that it's just political news. The reality is he's only the mayor of New York, but it is a powerful city. It's the financial capital of the United States. Some would say the financial capital of the world. Some people look at New York, when they think of Wall Street, they think of really the epicenter of capitalism. But Mamdani comes in with the complete opposite. He's someone who is going to push and has said himself socialist policies, everything from rent control, free buses. And when we talk about rent control, he said if these folks, these landlords aren't able to meet the standards, he says that the solution is to take over their buildings. This is something that in the United States we have not seen before. But again, he's going to be meeting with President Donald Trump. What do you believe is going to be the agenda of this discussion? Daniel, what do you foresee them discussing tomorrow?
Well, look, I mean, obviously, Mamdani is there to, with hat in hand, to make sure that the federal government, honors their commitments, to the city of New York. It must be defended. It must have security. It is the financial capital of the world. It is target number one to terrorists across the world, right? And so in that sense, I think the federal government does have a sense of responsibility to protect New York City. But given the sour relationship between the two and what's been said, and that Mamdani even almost challenged him in his acceptance speech to almost submit, to his agenda, I think he made a massive mistake. And I think that Donald Trump is going to flex some muscle. I think obviously it will get him to submit to his federal agenda. And so it's going to be a clash of personalities. That's what I'm predicting. Again, considering that, he does have a sense of responsibility to the citizens of New York. I mean, he was a New Yorker for almost his entire life, right? So he
Mm-hmm.
has a sense of loyalty to the city. But to go out of his way to make considerations for somebody who's been antagonistic against him, I think that spells trouble for New Yorkers. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think he's going to feel the pain, and Donald Trump will make him feel the pain in different ways. That I hope, again, comes with the considerations for the responsibility that we have for the citizens of New York.
Yeah, I like how you framed a little bit of the discussion. It's really two New Yorkers sitting down to discuss. It's two gentlemen who also ran on the populist view of when it comes to understanding the concerns of people. Affordability, something that Donald Trump ran on in 2016, 2020, and then very much in 2024. So did Mamdani right now in 2025. But I do agree. I think Mamdani comes in with more to lose than President Donald Trump. There is a need from New York for those federal funds. Again, we mentioned Wall Street. You also mentioned terrorism when it comes to security. The reality is Donald Trump also has priorities. He hasn't really targeted New York, right? When we look at the department, DHS specifically, ICE raids, or even the National Guard, where he's talked about places like Oregon or Chicago, also DC. New York, while it's been on the list, Donald Trump hasn't moved in that direction yet. I wonder if Mamdani is sort of, like you said, hat in hand, going to say, like, hey, let us take care of this, right? I think the rhetoric in the conversation is going to be
Yeah,
very
I don't know
different than
about
the
that, Wadi.
rhetoric
Look,
afterwards.
I'm very honest when I say that I honestly feel that Donald Trump will go out of his way and will move hell and high water to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that none of the monies of the federal monies that they're getting from the Trump administration finance any of the imbecilic bullshit agenda that Mamdani is trying to impose on New Yorkers that has any whiff of socialism to it. I think he's going to police that to make sure it's compliant, because I don't think Donald Trump wants him to be anywhere near successful
Mm-hmm.
with these socialist programs that would then be emulated by other cities. It's a danger to New York, and it's a danger to other societies. And so I honestly feel that Donald Trump will go out of his way to police and police in the sense that you make sure that there's full compliance, that the money that comes from the federal government is used specifically for the reasons that are going to be prescribed. And I think if there's any violation, he's going to call him under.
I think that's a good strategy because the concern that people, and I'll even give some credit to the media, have called out Mamdani on is understanding where the money is going to come from. He famously talks about the 2% increase to multimillionaires, but the math still doesn't add up. Again, credit to some in the media, and also on the right, people have said the math doesn't add up. Everything he says that's going to change, again, from the free bodega to the free bus to the rent control, all the things he wants to pay for, it still doesn't add up. So federal dollars might be the place where Mamdani is trying to hope to take this from. So the point that Donald Trump comes in and says, hey, this will not be touched. The moment this is even thought of being touched, it will be taken away from you. Because Mamdani, he's going to have his hands out. He's mayor. He's not king of New York. He still has to go through Albany. He still would have to work with the federal government. It's not something that can just be done
Well,
with a
and
magic
keep in
wand.
mind, there are 7 Republican congressmen out of New York, right? And they are going to make sure that there is full compliance with the allocation of resources.
What do you think? I want to one last question, more on the politics of things. Again, the Democrats have really seemed or are a partyless party at the moment, where people look at Governor Newsom as a potential sort of front runner just to where the party is going. Chuck Schumer has taken a huge blow to his leadership right now during the government shutdown. Hakeem Jeffries hasn't really seemed to be, become front and center as the minority leader in the House. Some people are looking at Mamdani. Do you think Mamdani will also try to use this meeting as a way to come in and he has his own agenda and maybe demonstrate that he is the new future of the party, right? That he can now compete with an AOC or Bernie Sanders. Do you think that might be on his agenda as well, or do you think he's going to wait to do that in the future?
I think the problem that the Democratic Party has is that its best communicators are its most extreme members. And I mean
Mm-hmm.
AOC, Mamdani, You have other
Even
folks.
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, Newsom and Bernie Sanders are best able to communicate these fantastical, delusions of grandeur to voters, right? And voters honestly feel or are persuaded by these, con artists that they're going to deliver on everything that they're saying, that they're promising, right? And this whole lollipops and rainbows and bombones, that world is just gonna, they're gonna make all your wildest dreams come true, to quote Napoleon Dynamite. And they're not, obviously. And so when it doesn't happen, Wadi, what they do is blame the opposition, right? Well, could have got there, but I was stopped. So they double down on their fantastical ideas, and they double down on their narratives. And what's happened is that there's been this sort of lurch to the extreme because the David Hoggs of the world are winning, the narratives. And meanwhile, if there's any sense of reasonableness and common sense, in the party, they're losing seats, to these folks. In fact, I think they now have a lot of challengers that are Mamdani types coming up in the Democratic primaries. So I think the party is going to continue to lurch hard left, socialist, and they're going to lose a lot of folks in the middle. But because they're such good communicators at selling and marketing their ideas, they will. Some of them will convince just enough, to win elections and sell that this is what the people want. And so, unfortunately, those hardworking middle class folks, that get the sticker shock, at the end of the terms of these radical extremists, are not coming out to vote, are not, mobilizing, are not, fulfilling their civic duty to elect common sense, policy champions who understand the free market system and how good we got it in America, and we're losing it. We're losing it because of the extremes on basically both sides, but really, these merchants of bad ideas, that we have on the left.
Conservatives need to be awakened and need to realize 100% what you just said is that the best communicators on the left are the extremists. They are good marketers of their ideas. What the conservatives need to do then is that they need to make sure that they are also good marketers of their own ideas and of the solutions and the results of their ideas, because I think not enough people were calling out the left on their bad ideas and what that would result in. And I think it's going to be a very interesting sit down. Go ahead, Daniel.
No, it's really hard to sell hard work, risk taking, sacrifices, putting off now for later, to achieve, great and wonderful things, through persistence and overcoming barriers. And on the other side, give me your money, redistribution of capital. You make too much, you keep too much, you're wealthy, you should give it to the poor. And so these narratives, that are being sold by the left that are ruinous, that will kill productivity, that will absolutely demolish our free market system, are the ones that are winning the day because of this resentment, and which really, I think, violates, the 10th Amendment of thou shalt not covet. And what I mean by that is that you have to earn what you have. You have to work hard to achieve things, right? And so that's a hard sell, Wadi. That's a really hard sell.
It's a hard sell, but it's one that conservatives are going to have to figure out. It's difficult, but it's one that they're going to have to move forward on. I do want to thank Daniel for joining us for this show. Great topics that we got to discuss that are going on front and center in the news. Thank you, Daniel, again for being here with us. I do want to thank our audience for tuning in. Again, this has been The Game, the show where we go play by play, analyzing the game of politics. We'll see you here next time.